Patch creation.
Obviously, there are many different factors that affect the overall tone that you may be chasing, and obviously it starts from the guitar, the type of pickups you're using, the type of wood that the guitar is made out of, right through to the gauge of the strings. So, obviously, patches made on one guitar may sound totally different on a totally different guitar. So, you need to keep that in mind when you're creating your patches. It may be necessary to set up the patches for two different types of guitars. As we touched on earlier, you can control this to a small degree by using the master input and presence controls. But when you've got two totally, you might have a solid body guitar and then a semi acoustic or a hollow body that's going to sound just totally different. So it may be necessary to think of that when you're creating patches and then create other patches for your other guitars. So, there's I tend to try and categorize sounds into 3 or 4 different categories. I've got dirty sounds, which are all my overdriven and distorted patches, clean sounds, and then special effects like synth sounds and that kind of thing. So let's have a look at some different ways of creating some tone from scratch.
The GT10 has an easy tone function which makes it pretty easy to get a pleasing tone in minutes, but it is worthwhile and creatively very satisfying to be able to build a patch from scratch. First, find a patch that you are happy to overwrite, and then initialize it as described in Chapter 1 of this DVD. This will give you a blank canvas to start building with. Now go ahead and enter the Preamp menu. Let's begin by selecting the preamp mode, of which there are 4 types. Press the left cursor button to arrive at the preamp mode page. First, let me explain how the 4 modes differ from each other so that you can make a more informed decision about which one you'd like to use for your first patch.
Single.
This mode acts in the same way as a regular 2-channel amplifier. You can select 2 totally different preamps in this mode, but only one is active at any given time. You can assign the channels to a controller so that you can conveniently switch between the 2.
Dual mono.
This mode works similarly to the single mode, except both channels will be heard simultaneously. It is just like running your guitar into 2 amps at the same time.
Dual left and right.
This one results in channel A being heard in the left speaker and channel B being heard in the right speaker simultaneously. Great for really fat stereo tones, or even having a clean preamp in one side and a distorted preamp in the other, as if there were 2 guitarists playing. You can use the channel delay time to give some separation between the 2 channels. This function will delay channel B for up to 100 milliseconds. I generally like a setting of between 30 and 50 milliseconds.
Dynamic.
Dynamic mode uses 2 preamps that will change based on the input level. You can set it up so that it will change based on how hard you pick the strings, or whether the guitar's volume knob is rolled off. Check out the assignments chapter to learn about properly setting this up. For the purposes of this demonstration, let's just use the single mode. Press the right cursor to access page 2 of the preamp menu. Here you will find all of the parameters that make up the amp's tone. First, select what amp you want to use. There are 40 different models available to choose from, ranging from crystal clean to brutal high gain amps. I've selected the Rectifier Modern because I want to make a high gain sound. The gain setting controls how much warmth, punch, or distortion your preamp's tone has. In clean sounds, it can add warmth and more detail to your sound, although high settings may cause your sound to break up or distort. In crunch and other heavy tones, it will give your sound more punch and drive. Where I find that a lot of people go wrong with gain is cranking in too much in the hope of getting a really huge tone. This actually has the opposite effect and makes the preamp less punchy and destroys any detail and articulation that the amp has. Basically, it just becomes a mess. If you want your amp to sound huge, then seriously resist the urge to crank in too much gain. I'm going to use a setting of 25 for this patch, but your mileage may vary based on the type of pickups your guitar has. The bass, mid, treble, and presence parameters allow you to tailor your tone like you would on a conventional amplifier. You should set these controls to suit your taste, and everyone's taste will vary. Some of the original amplifiers that the GT10's models are based upon have a bright button. As a consequence, this parameter will only appear in the amps that actively used it. This adds extra bite, or as the name suggests, brightness to your sound. This parameter will only appear in the models based on the amps that actually had a bright control. There are 3 gain switch settings available: low, middle, and high. This directly affects the intensity of the perceived gain and is relative to the gain knob setting. It is recommended that this be set to middle for normal results. Again, too much gain can cause your sound to unnaturally break up and distort. Set the level of your preamp. I've used a setting of 60 for this patch, and I'm usually pretty conservative with this setting so that I have plenty of headroom for adding other effects without introducing clipping or unwanted distortion. When the solo switch is engaged, a mid-range boost is applied that is conducive to soloing, allowing your sound to cut through a little better. Adjusting the solo level parameter defines how much of a volume boost is applied when the button is turned on. Okay, so let's hit the right cursor button to access the speaker settings. Here are a variety of settings that simulate different amplifier speakers as well as microphones. The speaker settings vary from a single 8-inch speaker to a double stack of 4x12 cabinets, which are also known as quad boxes. You can also create your own custom settings. I'll show you how to do this in the custom settings chapter of this DVD. I've chosen an 8x12 speaker for my patch. The microphone simulations are based on industry standard microphones: the Shure SM57, Sennheiser MD421 dynamic mic, an AKG C451 condenser mic, and a Neumann U87 condenser mic. You can vary the placement and distance that the mic is from the speaker, so you may want to experiment with these different settings and again, choose them based on your own personal taste. I've gone for the SM57 placed on the speaker directly at the center. Turning this parameter up moves the microphone further away from the speaker. So now you should have a dry preamp tone that is sounding pretty good. From here, you can apply EQ if you feel you need to shape it a little more. Compression can also be applied to add some punch to your tone. The very nature of distorted tones is that they are already somewhat compressed, so you don't want to overdo it here, but a setting such as the normal comp preset should be fine for most applications. When you are happy with your preamp sound, move on to the overdrive. For a solo patch, we want our sound to cut through or stand out from the rest of the band instruments, so I like to use an overdrive to act as a boost, to give our tone a little more dynamics. Here, we'll use the Tube Screamer simulation, and I will set the drive fairly low, and the level to between 50 and 75. If you toggle the effect on and off, you'll hear the difference that the overdrive has made. Now let's move on to the delay and reverb. These effects help give your tone a little more depth. Set right, they can really help your sound sing, although if you overdo it, they can also easily suffocate your sound and make it sound washed out. Here are my personal settings, and they are merely recommendations. Again, tweak to suit your own personal taste. Now we'll set a mild chorus to give our solos some spread. And finally, if the sound is still not quite right, you can use the EQ to fine-tune it. Remember that using EQ is not compulsory, and if you love your sound without it, great, don't use it. So, we've made all of our settings. Don't forget to press right twice to save the patch.
Due to how versatile the GT10 is, it's sometimes worth thinking out of the box a little bit when you're creating your tones. Now, obviously most people would probably start using the preamps to shape their tone, and we've had a look at how to do that by just setting up a single preamp and then using the EQ to adjust the overall tone and all that. But let's have a look at a different way of, a whole different angle of creating a patch here. Now, sometimes what I like to do is, and I kind of touched on this with the external stomp boxes, where you could set the preamp to a full range preamp and then shape your tone using an overdrive. Now, let's set that up. So basically what I've got here is a preamp tone. So it's using a rectifier preamp sim. Now, first of all, I would encourage you to go through all the different preamp simulations and just see which ones, appeal to you. Now, in this case, what I'm going to do is change the rectifier to the full range. Now, by default, if you were to initialize a patch, all the settings within this preamp would default to 50. And that's probably not a bad place to start. So I'll just quickly set those back to 50. Okay, so that's just my straight. It's just a flat, clean tone, and it's what I would refer to as a blank canvas, because what we're going to do now is start splashing a little bit of paint on there. By that I mean we're going to double click the overdrive to turn the overdrive on, and in this case it's giving me a 60s fuzz. It's not actually the preamp I want, the overdrive I want, so I'm just going to go to the type and let's have a look. Let's dial in a metal zone. Now, it's got a lot of gain there. I might just turn the gain down. If you haven't already worked out, I'm not a fan of using a lot of gain. I like to create more dynamics by using less gain. And okay, so that's not a bad start. Now, all I've done there is put an overdrive using the metal zone simulation basically in front of a full range clean preamp. Now if I go back to the preamp, here's where the really cool stuff happens. And I did mention this earlier, but the tone stack in the full range amp sim becomes very sensitive to change. So as I start dialing in different levels here, you can hear how much of a dramatic effect just small increments of the EQ make. So, and then I can go over to the speaker simulations. Let's see, I might use I don't know, 2x12. So that's just another way that you can quickly dial in tones. Now, the really cool thing with using this method is just by keeping the preamp set to the full range is you can dial through all the different overdrives. Whoops. And the overdrives take on a dramatically different character because you're just running them straight into a full range preamp. That's the gov. That's a straight distortion. Let's have a look at, say, an octafuzz. Might get a little bit more gain on that one. So there you go. There's a different way of, hopefully getting your creative juices flowing.